You have to shift gears a little bit and really talk about how do we open up possibility. But unless you built out the rest of the picture, then it'll be one person pulling the sled up the hill. And part of the reason why you saw me in fifth gear is
we're here, final day, RIA Edge West with my man Joe Walker, the COO of Bradley, Foster, Sargent. Joe, what an awesome few days. What do you think has made this event so special?
Well, I think really the people. And if you think about the people who take time out to come to an event like this and the Informa folks who put it together, you could do these things virtually, but at the end of the day, your opportunity to meet up with people, exchange ideas, catch up for the people you met at other functions and other conferences, it's phenomenal.
Awesome. A few people have really enjoyed the intimacy of this one. You know, like other bigger events, you might be lucky to bump elbows with somebody once, maybe twice. But here, I feel like we've gotten to hang out a few times now. Are you feeling that?
Absolutely. I mean, the venue's great. And as you said, there are conference venues that are so gigantic that, sometimes there are people there and I hear from them afterwards saying, sorry we never bumped into each other. We had just breakout session rooms that were great and a nice gathering area and a lot of space to work in, but not so much that we felt lost.
Awesome. Yeah, I really have enjoyed being able to drill deep as opposed to just kind of skating around on the surface with folks. So really appreciate this. I've been really excited about having a longer conversation with you. We first bumped into each other at Edge.
Yeah.
And I just loved your thinking. There was a technology panel there that you were a big part of. And then at this event, you're a big contributor to the CTO think tank. I think I walked into that room 3-4 times and that was a long one. How long? 2.5 hours?
Yeah, 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours. Every time I walked into that room, like you were in fifth gear, just pumping. What is it about that type of conversation that gets your juices flowing? Again,
it's the people. You put a group of people in the room and everybody walks in. I remember the first one I went to. This is think tank number 4. So I remember the first one and it was, we're all sitting there like, what are we going to do? And John's a great leader, so he kind of shepherded us along. Each one of them has been very unique. And this one was especially exciting for me because we kind of moved beyond just the technology discussion. And part of the reason why you saw me in fifth gear is when you start talking about achieving that alignment, what are your businesses trying to do? How are they trying to grow? Where are they going? What are the dynamics that are making that happen? And then how are you supporting that in technology? Where does technology cease to be kind of isolated pillar and really start to mesh with the overall structure? Because I think people have kind of looked at it. They even describe, I think I've heard this phrase a number of times this week, is people, process, and technology. And they kind of describe those as very distinct pillars. But there's a set of dependencies that are intrinsic there. And those dependencies were really the meat and potatoes of our CTO think tank discussion.
Awesome. You guys covered so much ground. I remember that conversation from IT management to cyber to org structure and strategic planning. I always like to think that if you start at the base of just general IT management, so often it's seen as a cost center, but this is a conference about growth. And I see IT management as like one of the biggest, most powerful growth levers you can get your hands on, kind of implicitly. But if you have that foundation of great IT management, like growth also includes the reduction of barriers, right? So if you can remove resistance through great IT management, I believe it's just a force multiplier for growth. What are your thoughts there with regards to the technology management, the org structure and the cyber? How do you see that through the lens of growth?
So I think there's an element of this that a friend of mine refers to as KTLOE, keep the lights on. And so we all have a responsibility for infrastructure. We have a responsibility for cyber and privacy, data governance, pieces like that. Those elements kind of ebb and flow depending on circumstance. So there's the keep the lights on aspect of things. But when you start talking about drivers for the growth engine in your company, then you have to shift gears a little bit and really talk about, well, how do we do this? How do we open up possibility? So real simple example, a number of organizations wanted to increase their TAM, their total addressable market. Well, how do you do that? There's a lot of different ways to do that. One of the things that people experimented with, and I would say that the early experiments were less than spectacular, but it doesn't mean it won't ultimately come to pass in a better form, is digital advice. Robo-advice is what you heard most frequently in the media. So you take technology and you apply it to an existing set of ingredients, and all of a sudden you have a larger market, you have a different cost structure, you have people who you can open up your investment offerings to that could never meet your minimums. And if you're thinking about part of your mission as an organization is to do right, well, a bunch of underserved people or people who maybe have been served by substandard advice through other channels now can benefit from what you're bringing to the table. So that's where technology starts to play a very different role. And as you said, start to move away from its traditional viewpoint or the viewpoint of boards and management of, oh man, how much are those guys going to spend this year?
Yeah. Well, that's something that really gets me so excited with the macro demographic shifts and trends to be able, like you say, to adjust that cost structure, to open up, to lower minimums. And like today's mass affluent is tomorrow's accumulator and HNW and UHNW, right? Yeah. And that the next 20 years is going to be such an interesting spectacle just to bear witness to. How do you think that firms, preparing for those trends and maybe opening up, increasing their TAM, like how do you think that they're best positioning themselves? And what do you think with regards to technology is going to separate the winners from the losers?
That's a big question.
Big question.
So I'll kind of unpack that into a few different pieces. Right. So I think first and foremost, companies really need to spend some time thinking about their ideal client. Who are we best served, positioned to serve? And I think you can have all the aspirations in the world to address a certain segment in the marketplace. But if you're not set up to serve them, you'll have less than spectacular success and certainly less than spectacular profitability in those areas. So I think some of this is who are we best suited to serve? Now, there's plenty of room for aspirational growth there. You can look at it and say, hey, look, maybe we can't do some of these things right now, but we'll grow into that. So we'll make that part of our strategic plan to be able to address a broader and broader swath of that market segment that we're looking at. But I think it's looking at that and then saying, okay, what can we bring to the table? And what do we need to do to be exceptional at it? So a couple of the sessions, people have talked about that notion of you need to be able to walk the walk. When you walk into a room and you address a family office, so let's say that's a space you want. Exact opposite of the mass affluent. So, but family office space is growing and growing very rapidly. Yes. There's new millionaires and multi-millionaire high net worth, ultra high net worth families kind of getting formed up or expanding or getting to that threshold every day. So you look at it and you say, what do you need to do just to make it in the front door? But even if you get there, it's kind of like the M&A deal-making conversations that are kind of a second cousin to this in a way. Within the first 5 minutes, most people in that space know whether or not they're going to do business with you in some form, or whether, and they may look at it and say, it's a little bit binary, you're in or out. And then it becomes a question of, well, how long is it going to take for us to get to know these people? In a lot of ways, the individual investor engagement is not too different. You have a chance to make an initial impression, whether that's on social, whether that's in a face-to-face event, whether that's a virtual introduction, those types of things. You have a very limited window to make your first impression and establish your value.
I thought you were going to say the winners require a COO who loves strategic technology thinking. That's what I thought you were going to say.
Well, I think, it's interesting because you could actually get the perfect COO, CTO, even CEO, but unless you built out the rest of the picture, then it'll be one person pulling the sled up the hill. So I think it needs to really be an organizational construct and a vision that you're pursuing. And if you don't have that vision, then that's a great place to build because that'll help you understand what your need is. We talked in the think tank about when do I need a CTO? And so there was a huge level of dispersion in the responses to that question. And for some people, it was literally when I can't see myself surviving another day without one. And the response to that was, well, it's too late at that point. Well, not really. I think the statistics on qualified candidates to be a CTO, a bona fide CTO in an RIA of size are not encouraging. I think John O'Connell assisted with the search and he ended up in a nationwide search with 23 candidates. So that's not to say there are only 23 people in the country, but when you winnow it down and you say, okay, who's got the requisite experience, who understands this particular niche within financial services, which is an awfully big space, just because you've been a CTO at a hedge fund doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a good CTO in an RIA. Even though they're both RIAs, the hedge fund space is very different. just because you've been successful in a bank holding company that had a captive wealth management unit doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be successful.
Now, this is an interesting topic, right? So whatever that TAM was, to have it winnowed down to 23 candidates, right, where they have both the relevant experience and hopefully achievement and chops, right, evidence of it, and that deep technology capability and understanding. I always find in technology, it's a very rare bird indeed. Such an interesting mix that is that requirement for that CTO. Do you feel like the industry needs to be doing a better job to cultivate that group of candidates? Do you think there's other avenues strategically that we can do to make sure that we do have that talent coming up in the industry? Do you think there's a problem to solve here? And if so, how do you think we can work towards making it better?
I think there is a problem in the sense that if you listen to some of the conversation throughout the last couple of days and you think back about other conferences you've attended, there's actually an issue with investor education. A lot of people are still getting their heads wrapped around what their rights and responsibilities, kind of required knowledge base and awareness ought to be as an investor. Part of the reason why people come to us is they don't want to worry about some of those things, but they need to be educated. Here's what a financial plan is all about, those types of things. So you take that and you extrapolate and you say, okay, we're not even talking about participants. Those are the participants in our industry. We're talking about the workers, the leaders of tomorrow. And so there's a huge need for education. And I think there's a need for mentorship. And I don't know that the industry is quite where it could be or should be in terms of growth leadership and mentorship in helping find promising talent, help them through their first steps in the industry, groom them along the way to understand what it is to be a fiduciary. Because if you're part of a fiduciary organization, everybody has a role in that.
Yes.
And it's very serious, and you're talking about people's life savings, and these are all really deep considerations. So you're not producing widgets.
Yeah.
So I think there is a problem in the sense that there shouldn't be such a tiny pool of candidates, and that one anecdote does not make a trend, but I think it's just a little bit of a wake-up call that what are we doing? So the other structural aspect that we need to think about is, to what extent do we have a framework where we can virtualize this position, where you can find people who are qualified, who are going to play a fractional role, particularly for a rapidly growing firm that needs a slice of that CTO leadership and role, but maybe isn't at a point in scale where they can justify the position or where they even can focus properly on what that person would bring to the table. So I think this notion of a VCTO is actually one that will gain steam. It already has. I mean, there are people who do that. They tend to be very industry specific. So there's a handful of people who do that in our space, but not just in our space. I know people who do it in healthcare and in pharma and other areas where there's a really specialized set of industry knowledge that's required to be successful and to have a seat at the table and intelligently participate in the growth conversations.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, that CTO investment, if you are serious about bringing on full time, that's a pretty serious investment. I've heard figures thrown around. Like if you're upper mid market and above, and you're bringing on CTO, are we talking 350 range annual?
I'd say your floor is probably somewhere in that 350, and it's going to get more expensive quite rapidly.
Yeah.
And part of that is something that we saw with the CCO role. So as that role of Chief Compliance Officer became more and more important and ultimately mandated, then there was a point in time where mutual funds were having difficulty hiring CCOs. And part of the reason for that was the risk that was associated, the compliance risk, was significantly higher than it had ever been. And qualified candidates were simply refusing the jobs because the comp wasn't enough to, I could end up with being the subject of an investigation or worse, a legal action against the firm. So I want to be compensated for that. CTOs are now facing a lot of those same pressures in terms of cyber and loss mitigation and so forth. So I think we are entering into a time period where the salary compression that existed there is being pulled away.
Think that's for the better?
I think it's a good thing in the sense that when you underinvest in your business, it tends to come back and bite you. And people have been able to underinvest by taking somebody who has some technology aptitude and promoting them to the point where they really can't do it.
Yeah.
So that's all about being efficient with your dollars and resisting, over-engineering your firm. I've heard that term, like, oh, we don't want to, we're not Merrill Lynch, or we're not, name your big, huge company.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if your aspirations are to grow to be a significant presence and to attract others to your firm
Yes.
and get them to bank their careers and their livelihood on your firm, you have a responsibility.
Absolutely. Now, Joe, I wonder, can you share a little bit about your firm, what you guys are up to, and maybe a bit of the firm's backstory?
Yeah. So Bradley, Foster & Sargent remains an independent private RIA. And I think we're now the largest, or among the largest, private RIAs between New York and Boston. So New York and Boston, throw a stone and you hit an RIA. But in that New England area, close to $8 billion, we've gotten larger, and that's the wonderful thing. The firm's origin was really with three partners in the early days, and they formed up the firm in 1993 and just grew it very aggressively. We just celebrated our 30-year anniversary, and that was awesome.
Congrats.
I think the official firm founding was probably, just after 93. But they came together, had a vision, built the firm organically. And it's only been within the last 3 years, really, that we've started to really address the inorganic growth part and looking at really talented people, finding a way to give them a home where they can prosper and where they can really do the things they love to do in terms of portfolio construction and client servicing, and having the intellectual freedom to do those things without a product mandate or some of the other mandates that you would run into in RAs that are part of larger financial services concerns.
Awesome. And I imagine it's a pretty solid platform with a very nice technology outlay. And if I'm getting to know you well enough, it sounds like continuous improvement is a big part. Does that seem
There's
correct?
a ton of continuous improvement because the firm, over a period of years, made the decision to focus on the people and the clients more so than the technology stack. So when I arrived 3 years ago, I inherited a fairly antiquated tech stack, which we've built out really aggressively over 3 years. And I'd say we're in the early innings of that in terms of what our plans are.
Cool. Well, they must be excited to have you on board. It sounds like you're headed in the right direction. As COO, I imagine you've got your fingers in a smattering of everything. It seems like a lot of it lights you up. In your day-to-day, what is your happy place? Where does the magic happen for you? What's your favorite thing to do in your role?
My background has been kind of barbelled, where I started out in an RIA. I spent the middle part of my career in fintech, and now I'm back at an RIA. So I think there's a love for clients in there. And I think when I get to be client-facing, or I'm able to facilitate something that has a direct impact on client, that kind of lights me up. So I get a whole bunch of different avenues to run down. So building a great team is a real source of pride to me. Finding great people, giving them structure to work, and giving them the freedom to participate in that continuous improvement process. That's one thing that's kind of new to a lot of folks, is they have a voice.
Yeah.
And we meet regularly. We have ways that we've kind of institutionalized to channel communication and capture best ideas and our own next best actions for running ourselves. So I think a lot of people talk about AI and what they're going to do with clients and how they're going to change the world. And I think for me, it starts on a very much more personal level, which is, how do I enable my team to have fantastic interactions between themselves? I think if we do those things, we will be great client service people.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. All right, Joe, I've appreciated the conversation. Are we going to see you in Boca Raton
Absolutely.
for RIA Edge 25?
Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
All right, we'll play some pickleball. We'll have a good time. Much appreciated, my man. Thank you.